The Jeff Younger Show is on. Dedicated to my sons, James and Jude.
You went to school for 16 years. Some of you maybe more. What can you actually do with it? Can you read a room? Can you judge character? Can you make a decision under pressure when the information is incomplete and the stakes are real and the time is short? Aristotle distinguished between two kinds of wisdom. One understands the universe and the other gets things done. Modern education doesn't produce either one of them, but only one of them is fitted to rulers. And this is a podcast for men who want to rule. So today we're going to talk about practical wisdom, what it is, why it's rare, and how you can develop it. Aristotle names two intellectual virtues that matter. Sophia, which we translate today as theoretical wisdom. This is scientific knowledge of the highest things. I say scientific, the formal sciences in the sense of logic. It grasps universal truths about nature, mathematics, the structure of reality. And Aristotle says that theoretical wisdom is scientific knowledge of many wondrous things. And I've had that experience. If you've done an in-depth study of geometry or differential geometry, you'll know it's amazing. It's mind-blowing and it's quite beautiful. The theoretical wise man, the sophos, as Aristotle called him, understands how the universe works. He can explain causes and principles. These are people like Thales, Anaxagoras, the great philosophers. These men possess Sophia. But here's what Aristotle noticed. These men were often totally useless at managing their own lives. Thales was so absorbed in contemplating the stars that he fell into a well and almost killed himself. The theoretically wise can be ignorant of what is advantageous to themselves. And what they know is extraordinary, wondrous, difficult, and even worthy of worship in the case of theology, but it's useless because it is not human goods that they seek. It doesn't produce useful things for people in this world. Now, Aristotle distinguished another way of thinking, which he called phronesis. This is practical wisdom. This is the capacity to deliberate well about what is good for yourself and for others. It concerns action, not contemplation. It deals with particulars, not universals. It aims at living well as a whole. The man with practical wisdom, the phronimos, knows what to do in specific situations. He reads circumstances accurately. He judges character. He acts at the right time in the right way and for the right reasons. So here's the key line here. Who is practically wise is fit to rule. There can be no philosopher king. Practical wisdom is the virtue of the ruler, not theoretical wisdom. And it's what makes a man capable of governing himself, his household, his city. Theoretical wisdom might impress people, and it probably is good for your soul, but practical wisdom is what leads people and creates prosperity. Modern education, I have to say, is just a complete disaster on both fronts here, both theoretical and practical wisdom. It doesn't produce theoretical wisdom because it doesn't teach anyone to think systematically about first principles. Okay? Students absorb information. They don't understand causes, though. They can't reason from premises to conclusions. They've never encountered a real argument, much less a constructed one. We know this because we test people's formal reasoning abilities when they're freshmen, and then we test them after they graduate, and we don't see any improvement. And actually, in about half the cases, we see that their formal reasoning capabilities are worse. But it's even, believe it or not, education is even worse at producing practical wisdom. And this is the catastrophe that I think matters most for the lives of young men, who this show is really directed to. Practical wisdom requires three things that modern education simply does not provide. First, it requires engagement with real decisions. Okay, Aristotle says practical wisdom is concerned with particulars. You can't learn it from a book. You learn it by actually having to decide with real stakes, with real consequences, and with incomplete information. Modern education removes students from real decisions for 2 decades. We put them in these artificial environments, and you sit in a classroom and someone else decides the curriculum. Someone else grades your work. Someone else determines whether you pass or fail. You never have to judge a situation for yourself. And most importantly, you may bear a bad grade, but you don't bear the real world consequences of being wrong, like losing money, losing food off your table, losing your car. Okay. Second reason is practical wisdom requires experience. And Aristotle is just totally blunt about this. Don't take this wrong. I'm just giving you facts. I'm not criticizing you. If you're a young man, don't take this as criticism. It's just facts. A young person is not a suitable audience for politics, for he has no experience of the actions of life. The prime of the soul, the peak of practical wisdom, comes around 49 or 50. Why is that? It's because that's how long it takes to accumulate enough experience to judge situations accurately. Okay, there's no shortcut. You can't read your way to practical wisdom. You can't sit down and learn how to play football from a textbook. Okay, you have to live it. You have to get on the field and play. The third reason that education fails to develop practical wisdom is that practical wisdom requires a moral formation. Practical wisdom is not morally neutral. Theoretical wisdom could be. You can consider arguments without reference to ethics, right? You can't do that with practical wisdom because it's precisely the capacity to deliberate well about what is good in this specific situation. And you can't do that if you don't know what good is. And you can't know what good is if your character is corrupt. So Aristotle says depravity produces distortion and false views about practical starting points. A vicious man can be clever, but he can never be practically wise. His appetites warp his judgment before the deliberation even begins. Now, here's where the story starts getting a little dangerous. You can know something in the universal without knowing it in the particular. And in practical life, it's the particular that matters. Okay, Aristotle gives an example. You can know what light meats are healthy. That's universal knowledge. But if you don't know which meats are light, you can't produce health. Meanwhile, the man who simply knows that bird meat is healthy, particular knowledge from experience, he'll actually make people, even though he doesn't have the theoretical knowledge. Some people who lack knowledge, most of all, those with experience, are more effective doers of action than are others who have knowledge. Young men consume content endlessly today. Podcasts, videos, threads, just hours of information. And then they sit on their ass and they do nothing. They feel like they've learned something, but how do they know? They didn't do anything with it. So here's a small test for you. The smallest possible test that I could possibly give you. If this content is valuable to you, subscribe. One click. Takes 2 seconds. If you can't do that, if you scroll past because you'll do it later, ask yourself, how many other small actions are you avoiding? The men who build things act on small decisions quickly. They act now. The men who drift let small decisions slide. Which one are you? Subscribe. Or admit something to yourself. Listen, I must say this more clearly. People with experience are always more effective than people who have knowledge. That's why book learning is not the way. It's not the way for religious theology. It's not the way for philosophy. It's not the way for learning mathematics. It's not the way for anything, okay? Book knowledge is not the way. You have to get out and solve real problems with real skin in the game. You need to be a real player in a real situation with real outcomes. The man with experience but without theory, it's so something that we see all the time. Google has even found this. Google pays non-degreed engineers more than it pays degreed engineers because their statistics in their company show they outperform. And the reason is very simple. They didn't need a teacher. They learned on their own, right? They have the practical wisdom and can make judgments. But the person who has a PhD and has been in academia all their life has no practical wisdom, can't make those judgments. So fundamentally, practical wisdom is practical. It aims at an action and an outcome, okay? And it aims at an outcome in a particular situation, not universals. And that's why credentials are total bullshit. A degree tells you someone was exposed to certain information. It does not tell you that they can do anything with it. The man who's been in the arena, who's made decisions, faced consequences, and learned from failure, he is something the credentialed expert often lacks. He has practical wisdom. And this practical wisdom requires some degree universal knowledge, but definitely particular knowledge. And if you had to choose, says Aristotle, one must possess both sorts of knowledge, but of practical wisdom, one needs it more. The particular knowledge and the experience matter more. That's why you should not study classics from men who have not run businesses, men who have no achievements other than being teachers in academia. Those are the last people you should listen to about the great books or about Greek or Roman learning or any of that stuff, okay? It does not come from people who only have book learning. You need experience to understand these things. Now, the problem is this. There aren't many practically wise people, and Aristotle noticed this. Why is that? First of all, the time requirement is brutal. You don't hit the peak until around 50. That's 30 years of adult life, man. Making decisions, suffering the consequences, learning from failure. Most men just never invest time in that deliberately. They just drift through life. They avoid hard choices. We talked about in previous video about how fortune is half in your control and half luck. Most men live in the half luck. They don't even try to control what they can. They just drift, right? They let others decide for them. Second, character formation usually fails in the modern world. Practical wisdom requires a very well-ordered soul. You have to want the right things before you can deliberate well about how to get them. You have to want the right things. But most men are, today especially, are ruled by appetites, by comfort, by fear. Their desires distort their judgment from the start. One of the big things now with a lot of classics teachers and classes you can get online in classics and stuff, it's like men who are doing bodybuilding, but they don't train for any particular sport. They're just doing bodybuilding, right? They're not going to use that strength for anything. They just want to have a certain appearance. It shows a certain mindset, and it's this mindset that they don't want the right things. The third thing is that modern life doesn't really have any feedback loops. Okay, practical wisdom develops when you have real consequences, and you go through a deliberate practice loop where you do something, you get immediate feedback on how well it was done, and you keep doing it until you improve. Modern institutions just don't do that. Okay, well, you don't sit there and iterate in a mathematical analysis class. You either get it when the teacher throws it out, and then you move on. And if you don't get it, you don't get it. That's just how it is. The bureaucrat who makes bad decisions, that guy doesn't lose his job. The academic who's wrong about everything still gets tenure. In fact, the academics that are right about stuff never get tenure. The politician who has destroyed whole cities, they just get reelected, right? There's no feedback loop, so there's no learning. And without that deliberate learning, there's just no practical wisdom that's going to result from that. And the fourth thing is that it really can't be taught directly. You can't find a guru to teach you practical wisdom. Now, you could teach facts, you could teach procedures, you could, to some degree, you could teach judgment through the study of history, but real practical judgment develops only by you making history. You got to go out and do things. You got to actually have to decide. You actually have to get it wrong. You actually have to feel the consequences, and you actually have to adjust. Okay? You can't get that from books. You got to go out and play the game. Okay? So Aristotle says that the function of the practically wise man is most of all to deliberate well. But deliberation is a skill that develops only through deliberating. No one can do it for you. No one can give you a shortcut. You have to go out and make decisions, fail, learn, get better. Okay? So you can't take a class and get practically wise. And frankly, most of the internet, when it comes to talking about classical books or trying to understand history, here we're talking about Aristotle, they would just tell you that you can learn that in a class. You can sign up for their online school or whatever. Listen to their podcast lectures or whatever. That's all bullshit. You're not going to get practical wisdom from that. And Aristotle himself says, so how do you really go about getting it? If the modern world's against you, what do you do? First of all, put yourself into position so you can actually seek out and make real decisions. Get into positions where you have to judge situations and bear the consequences. Don't be like these pussies that want to have the say, but then they're not responsible. Be the guy that gets the say so and carry the responsibility. And if it goes wrong, take responsibility. Don't hide in institutions. Don't hide in institutions that protect you from failure. Volunteer to lead. Go start a business for yourself. Take responsibility for outcomes that you can't fully control. Feel what that's like. Study particular cases. Okay, history is not just dates and names, it's a record of decisions. So think of history as a way for you to develop pattern matching skills. How did these men choose under specific circumstances? So you got to ask yourself, who's the man? What's his character? What are the circumstances? What resulted? When you read history, you have to think that way. You don't want to read history as memorizing facts. It's to build up your pattern recognition. Another way is to find men who have practical wisdom. Practical wisdom is very hard to articulate. Okay, so if you want to see it in action, hang around practically wise men and you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, you can watch them. You can see how they respond, how they read situations, how the timing of things happens, and how he handles people. Think of it more like an apprenticeship. So instead of finding friends you like, go look for men with practical wisdom, even if you don't like them, and get around those guys. The other thing is you have to just, in your mind, you got to just, and in your heart, you just have to accept the cost of experience. Yeah, I know. You're probably going to scroll past this. I know you are, man. It's not because you don't like this content. You know, you do. You like this content. But, I mean, that's why you're still here. You wouldn't have made it here if you didn't like it. But you're going to scroll past because you're going to tell yourself that you'll subscribe later. Next video, I'll do it next time. And when you have time and when you remember, yeah, man, but you're not going to remember. I've been watching men do this for 35 years. Not just with YouTube subscriptions, but just with everything. Job applications, hard conversations, good workouts. It's always later. It's always tomorrow. Here's the truth, man. Later's where good intentions go to die. It's the part of the pasture where all the bullshit is. You don't want to go there. You need to cut through the bullshit. Take action. Do it now, right? All I'm saying is it's 2 clicks, man. It's like 2 seconds. Hit subscribe and then click the bell. You can do that right now. Or you can just prove me right about you, man. Your call. You are going to get things wrong. Who gives a shit? Everybody gets things wrong. You're probably going to get some stuff really badly wrong multiple times. Who gives a shit? Everybody gets things really badly wrong multiple times, okay? That's the tuition for the school, man. That's the price you pay. And a man who's never failed, I guarantee you he's never learned anything practical. The goal is not to avoid mistakes. It's to survive and extract a lesson. This next one is a big one, okay? So if you think about theoretical wisdom, it's concerned with intellectual virtues. But practical wisdom is concerned with character virtues. So you need to want the right things and you need to be in control of yourself. If your appetites are disordered, if you're enslaved to pleasure, status, to comfort, if your judgment's going to be warped before you even start deliberating, you're done. The practically wise man is temperate, courageous, and just. And without those things, cleverness is just a kind of sophisticated vice. And the final advice I'd give you is just give it some time, okay? You're not going to be practically wise at 25. Aristotle puts the peak around 50 for a reason. It's not a weekend seminar, man. You can't join somebody's class online and get this stuff, okay? It's a 30-year project. So start now and you'll get there. If you expect shortcuts, you're never going to make it, man. You're never going to make it. There's an old story from China that I really like, and I used to tell it to my sons. A man comes to a martial arts master and says, how long would it take me to master your martial art? And he says, it'll take you 10 years. And he says, what if I work twice as hard as the other students? And the master said, then it'll take you 20 years. And so what if I devote all my waking time and energy to it? Then it'll take you 30 years. It's not how hard you work. It's the consistency of your work, right? And so you need to put yourself into positions where you can get judgment and make decisions and see how decisions are made under pressure, under moral pressure, under time pressure, under competitive pressure from other people, right? You need to learn how to do that. Here's what I did in my own life, right? I did what I called my mini MBA program in the early 1990s when I was fairly early in my career. And what I did was I actually started a public relations firm. I didn't know anything about, I was a software engineer. What do I know about public relations? And I made a profitable public relations company. Okay. And I learned about marketing from that. I put myself in a position to do enterprise sales at 3 different companies. I failed miserably the first time. I didn't even make $1 in sales the first time I tried sales. By the time I was done, I was knocking out $3 million deals every 2 months. Okay. I went into strategic marketing. Then I went into product management. So I put myself into position to fail all the time. You know what it's like to have your friends recommend you into a sales job at a company and make 0 revenue? That wasn't very easy for me, but I learned a lot from it, and I came back and developed a sales skill. So this is the kind of thing that you have to start developing in yourself. The other thing is seek out projects. I worked on really challenging projects early in my career. I worked with teams of mathematicians doing very tough optimization problems that had never been solved before. Okay. And we succeeded. Again, about a third of the time we failed and 2/3 of the time we succeeded. Overall, we succeeded in what we were attempting to accomplish. But I saw how hard it is to actually accomplish something like that, to actually come to know something completely new. Very difficult, right? I built multiple companies. I've built technology systems that are involved in about 1/3 of the sea traffic between America and China. I was involved in the early AI movement in the 90s, way before this stuff was cool. And I put myself into those positions deliberately because I wasn't afraid to fail. And frankly, a lot of times I did fail, and it was embarrassing, and my reputation suffered some hits from it. But I didn't care. And over time, I developed a tremendous amount of wisdom. And I'm trying to tell you how to gain that wisdom. It'd be nice if I could do a YouTube video and give that wisdom to you and articulate it to you in a course or something. Like all these other people will charge you money for a course. That's all bullshit. All I can tell you is how to get it. I can't tell you what it is. You have to develop that judgment for yourself. All right. So we've talked about 2 kinds of wisdom: theoretical wisdom that understands the universe, and practical wisdom that actually get things done. Modern education produces neither, but practical wisdom is what you actually need. It's what's fitted to rule. It governs action, and it makes you effective in the world. It develops only through real decisions, real consequences, real experience. There is no shortcut. There's no credential that you can get that substitutes for it. In fact, the better the credential somebody has, the more you should assume they don't have it. There's no book that can give it to you. There's no classics professor online that can give it to you in a lyceum. There's no self-help course you can get online or that you can attend and pay $1,000 for that can give this to you, okay? Few men have practical wisdom. And it's not an accident because the price for practical wisdom is very high. You have to put yourself into positions to deliberate and be responsible for outcomes. And you have to do that for decades with hard choices. And most men don't have the balls to do that. But the future belongs to men like that, men who can see clearly and act accordingly. That's the message I'm bringing you today. I can't tell you how to do it. I can't tell you what that wisdom is, but I can tell you how you can go about acquiring it. And I'm telling you that it's very hard and it requires decades. So you need to get off the internet and start putting yourself in a position where you can make decisions and be responsible for.
The Jeff Younger Show, signing off.
The outcomes. Get off the internet and go get to work.